Well, thank you everyone for coming. This is an honor to be able to talk about someone who I feel is one of the most significant personalities in the history of Rutgers University. It's wonderful that we are here to celebrate the 150th anniversary of the Rutgers Scientific School, which really started all this in terms of both agriculture and engineering. And also that we're leading ourselves up to 2016 with the 250th anniversary of Rutgers State University of New Jersey. Today I would just like to go, hopefully not too long, because I know you're going to be wanting to get to that reception, because it sounds very, very good. And I know that the dining services people took special care for that. But I would like to just take you through the story, centering in on George Hammell Cook, but also talking about some of the institutional developments that took place in the 19th century as we tell the story. So we shall begin. On July 2nd, 1862, President Abraham Lincoln signed the Land-Grant College Act of 1862, quote, an act donating public lands to the several states and territories which may provide colleges for the benefit of agriculture and mechanic arts. Gotta get my slides going here. While one can surmise that the passage of the act was an instance of forward-looking statecraft to expand the educational attainment of the people made possible by the succession of the Southern congressional opposition, the premise was also to advance the economic competitiveness of the nation and enhance the scientific understanding and practice of agriculture. The act, named for its author, Senator Justin Morrill of Vermont, provided federal land to each state and territory that was sold for the purpose of maintaining, and I shall quote, maintaining at least one college where the leading object shall be, without excluding other scientific and classical studies, and including military tactics, to teach such branches of learning as are related to agriculture and the mechanic arts, in order to promote the liberal and professional education of the industrial classes in the several pursuits and professions of life. In defending his bill before Congress, Morrill emphasized four objectives. First, he intended to open educational opportunities for the industrial classes. Since colleges mostly prepared students for various professions and were patronized by professional class, Morrill envisioned a college in each state that would be, quote, accessible to all, but especially to the sons of toil, the thousands willing and expecting to work their way through the world by the sweat of their brow. Second, to provide instruction in the practical avocations of life. The Act specifically mentioned agriculture and mechanic arts as being the leading objects. The third objective was to teach the practical arts alongside other scientific and classical studies. Morrill's purpose was to elevate the practical arts and those students who pursued such study to the same social standing as the AB degrees, and to further advance these subjects through their connection to higher learning. The fourth goal was to encourage what we may refer to today as the economic development through research. In his address before Congress, Morrill described in detail the declining productivity of American agriculture, which was in contrast to European countries in which agriculture was studied in a scientific manner. Modern sciences, he argued, quote, are more or less related to agriculture or mechanic arts. He envisioned professors of agriculture at the land-grant colleges who would apply scientific knowledge to reverse the curse of falling farm productivity. Several aspects of the legislation did not originate with Morrill. Similar educational schemes have been tried or proposed at existing agricultural colleges or polytechnic institutions. But the unique feature of the 1862 Act was offering the largest of the federal government through its ample supply of public land to assist in creating a perpetual endowment. The Act received passing mention in the press more as a federal land policy than as an educational innovation. The legislation was initially opposed in the West and the South and was not the product of popular demand for higher education reform. The promise of useful education in agriculture and mechanic arts for the masses would keep the land-grant colleges connected to what contemporaries call the industrial class. However, dirt farmers were largely uninvolved in instigating the land-grant movement. Furthermore, few sons of toil enrolled in these schools in the early years. Farmers and workers remained on the sideline, skeptical of book learning. Gentlemen farmers, scientists trained in German universities, and statesmen with interest in stimulating the economy instigated and supported the land-grant movement. The principal issue facing the first generation of land-grant colleges, including Rutgers College, was whether they were intended to be agricultural colleges, primarily serving the farming community, or full academic institutions teaching scientific and classical studies in addition to agriculture. The latter was soon adopted by the state of New Jersey under the vision and the leadership of George Hammell Cook. There. If we were to establish a list of individuals who had profound impact on the life of an institution such as Rutgers, George Cook's name would rise to the top. Born in 1818 and raised in Hanover in Morris County, New Jersey, George Cook's early years were devoted to the family farm, cultivating the land for producing wheat, rye, oats, corn, potatoes, and caring for the numerous chickens, pigs, cows, sheep, and oxen that were raised on the farm. It was during these years assisting his father when George developed a capacity for hard work, a characteristic that he displayed throughout his life. Cook received his early schooling in the local school district school and at the nearby Old Academy in Chatham, where he studied surveying and geometry. In 1836, he left Hanover to work as a surveyor on the Morris and Essex Railroad, and 2 years later, he was employed by the Canajoharie and Catskill Railroad in New York State. In December 1838, having completed his work on the C&C Railroad, he ventured to Troy, New York, to look for employment, and finding none, enrolled at the Rensselaer Institute under the tutelage of Amos Eaton. Under Eaton's leadership, Rensselaer was unique in being the only institution that taught science as a foundation for careers in engineering, scientific agriculture, mining, and industries associated with railroads and manufacturing. And Eaton's methods of instruction differed from that offered in institutions such as Yale, Harvard, or Princeton, that employed memorizing standard texts, listening to lectures, and occasionally observing experiments conducted by the professors. At Rensselaer, Eaton insisted on having his students conduct their own experiments in chemistry and physics, and search for botanical and geological specimens in the field. He even insisted that his students prepare lectures for class presentation to their fellow students. Cook studied at the Institute from December 1838 to March 1839 when he received a civil engineering degree. I don't think you can get a civil engineering degree that quickly here this time. He then accepted a teaching job back at the Old Academy in Chatham, New Jersey, where disliking the low pay and unruly students, he returned to Rensselaer as an assistant professor of engineering and surveying while he studied for and received a Bachelor of Natural Science degree in the summer of 1840. As Eaton's health deteriorated, Cook assumed more teaching and administrative responsibility. During the winter of 1840-41, he also began assisting the science teacher at the Troy Female Seminary, and in 1841 replaced him teaching during his vacation breaks at Rensselaer. When Amos Eaton died in 1842, the young, inexperienced junior professor kept Rensselaer operating. Cook assumed the administrative responsibilities of the school, recruited students to increase enrollment, expanded the curriculum, traveled to Boston to purchase laboratory supplies, and persuaded the city of Troy to give the school a building. Throughout, he continued to teach many of the science courses, particularly geology and chemistry, and gave public lectures on chemistry to raise money for the school. While continuing to teach the seminary, Cook met Mary Halsey Thomas, a graduate who had returned to teach and to whom Cook married in 1846. They would have 8 children, 5 of whom survived to adulthood. During the winter of 1845-46, Cook invested in an Albany, New York glass, enamel, and porcelain company, originally a sideline to his 2 teaching jobs, and suddenly resigned from Rensselaer in October 1846 to seek his fortune by becoming a full-time company manager. The company, however, failed after 2 years, and Cook returned to teaching, but this time the Albany Academy as professor of mathematics and natural philosophy, then serving as its principal for 3 years later. Concurrently, he resumed teaching at the Troy Female Seminary 2 days a week. It was also at this time when the New York State Legislature appointed Cook to conduct experiments in analysis of salt springs in Onondaga County in New York for 2 years. In 1852, he also lectured on the general principles of chemistry and inorganic chemistry at the Albany Medical College, assisting Louis Caleb Beck, who was also teaching part-time here at Rutgers College. At the Albany Academy, Cook found the teaching more demanding than at Rensselaer, with more and younger students, but he ultimately proved to be successful. And it was at the Academy where Cook began his association with the Reverend William Campbell and David Murray, two individuals who would assist him years later in developing the science curriculum and secure the land grant at Rutgers College. Campbell was hired as principal in 1848 to revive the Academy following several years of declining enrollments. When Campbell was lured to New Brunswick to assume a professorship in the theological seminary, Cook took his place as principal. At this time, a group of scientists and citizens developed plans for the establishment of a scientific university that would be affiliated with the Albany Medical College. All science professors from institutions in the area would devote 3 months each year to teach in Albany. But when the legislature failed to provide any funding for scholarships, the university plan died. With the failure of the great university to materialize, and with a cut in state funding for his salt research studies, George Cook became more receptive to an offer he received from Rutgers College. In 1853, George Cook began his long association with Rutgers in New Brunswick when he became professor of chemistry and natural science, the college's first full-time professor of science, and succeeding Louis Beck. At the same time, he was made assistant to the New Jersey state geologist William Kitchell, and himself became the state geologist in 1864. Encouraged by Campbell, who had joined the faculty of the Theological Seminary, who also taught rhetoric and belles lettres at the college, Cook embarked on a new career that would ultimately change the course of Rutgers and also solidify his standing in the scientific community. Somewhat reluctant to leave Albany and knowing full well that his wife Mary was not pleased with this prospect, George decided to take the position, but to assess his circumstances in 5 years. This is one of several homes that George Cook resided in New Brunswick. This one's at the corner of Seminary Place and George Street, over on the College Ave campus, known initially as Riverstead, and became the Demorest House, where former President William Henry Steele Demorest resided until his death. Immediately upon arriving in New Brunswick, however, he discovered that Rutgers College was fraught with problems. Its enrollments remained low, its finances were precarious, and its faculty were aging and rather uninspiring. Even its leader, Theodore Frelinghuysen, the former U.S. Senator, Chancellor of MRU, and Henry Clay's vice presidential candidate in 1844, had become ineffectual. By 1859, in an effort to revitalize the college, the trustees replaced all members of the faculty except for George Cook. And with the death of Frelinghuysen in 1862, Rutgers appointed a new president who would become its most effective leader, the Reverend William Henry Campbell. As previously mentioned, Campbell had arrived in New Brunswick a decade earlier to join the seminary faculty. Conservative in his religious beliefs, he was, according to Rutgers historian Richard P. McCormick, vigorous, enthusiastic, and on occasion tempestuous. The following story provides a wonderful example of this characteristic. In July 1854, as Campbell prepared to teach his seminary class in the third floor classroom in the old Queens building, it had become stifling hot, and he decided these intolerable conditions must end. He exhorted his students to protest against these unbearable circumstances and demand a new building. With both faculty and students showing their displeasure, church authorities were able to convince Mrs. Anna Herzog of Philadelphia to provide funds for a building as a memorial to her late husband, Peter. In 1856, all seminary instruction was moved to a spacious structure north of Queens campus, initially known as Theological Hall, and later renamed Herzog Hall, thus marking the physical separation of the seminary from the college. A few years later, during Campbell's terms, Rutgers would completely sever its relationships with the Dutch Church and reclaim Old Queens, which was conveyed to the church in 1823 to reduce the college's debt at the time. At the time that Campbell assumed the presidency, there were 3 resignations which made the addition of several energetic and able men. Foremost among these new professors was David Murray, who received the appointment of professor of mathematics, natural philosophy, and astronomy. Murray was a colleague of both Campbell's and Cook's at the Albany Academy. In fact, Murray succeeded Cook as principal of the Academy and made it known to his friend that he desired a position as a college professor. Joining Cook and Campbell proved to be fortuitous for Rutgers as the 3 men set out to transform the small classical college. Two significant events that occurred during the Campbell's administration had profound and lasting effects on Rutgers. In 1863, Campbell chaired a committee composed of prominent trustees and alumni who campaigned relentlessly to raise $100,000 to be used for faculty salaries. Within a year, the goal had been obtained, and when the campaign came to an end in June of 1864, the new endowment fund, as it was called, exceeded $137,000. With an adequate endowment in hand and getting back the old Queens building for collegiate instruction, Campbell set out to move Rutgers forward. In 1864, an unexpected opportunity surfaced, and Rutgers found itself in a relationship with the state of New Jersey. It had become a land-grant college. In March of 1863, the state legislature of New Jersey accepted the provisions of the Morrill Act. When the trustees and faculty at Rutgers became interested in securing the designation, it became apparent that one of its biggest assets in securing the land grant was George Cook. The successful administration of the federal land grant in the college called for knowledge of science, farm, factory, and academic administration. In all these fields, Cook was uniquely qualified. His work on a geological survey with Kitchell had focused upon the great beds of green sand marl, which stretched across the state of New Jersey and provided some of the best fertilizer available to farmers in the mid-19th century. In conducting research for the survey, he had come to know the farmers and farms of the Garden State. The years he spent as principal of the Albany Academy, as scientific manager of a glass factory, and as a teacher of science, all had provided him with more knowledge and expertise. Perhaps more important were Cook's qualities of patience and friendliness and his inordinate capacity for hard work. These traits eventually established him as one of the most admired and respected men in the state. Before Cook could put his talents to work in the land-grant college, however, the whole question of which institution in New Jersey was to get the money, and that all had to be determined. The Morrill Act left that decision to the discretion of the state legislature and gave them 2 years to accept the provisions of the act. The money could be used to establish new college or colleges. State colleges could receive the donation, or established private or religiously controlled colleges could be designated. The amount of land granted was determined by the number of representatives and senators a state had in Congress. No money could be used for buildings. Almost all had to go for salaries of professors. The small states, therefore, simply could not afford to establish new schools. In New Jersey, the question resolved itself into a struggle among 3 existing colleges: Rutgers, sponsored by the Dutch Reformed Church, Princeton, a Presbyterian institution, and the public normal school in Trenton. At Rutgers, Cook was interested in the bill as early as March of 1863 and wrote a letter to inquire to Garrett Vroom, son of former governor and Rutgers trustee Peter Vroom. The next evidence of interest appeared in the minutes of the Rutgers faculty meeting held on December 8th of 1863, stating that Professors Cook and David Murray had urged the faculty to, quote, adopt a plan for securing the proceeds of the land grant as an endowment for Rutgers College by establishing a scientific department in connection with it on the plan of that of the Sheffield Scientific School at Yale. Such an upgrading of the science program would, they hoped, add weight to the Rutgers bid for the endowment. The faculty voted to allow Cook and Murray to bring the matter to the attention of the trustees. The trustees soon followed with his endorsement on January 13, 1864. In its deliberation, the trustees referred to the original colonial charter that stated that Queens College would teach not only the learned languages, but also other branches of useful knowledge. Accordingly, the trustees established the Rutgers Scientific School, agreed to petition the legislature to favor their institution with the land grant, and formed a committee of 5 chaired by former New Jersey Governor Vroom to advance their cause in Trenton. Meanwhile, in Trenton, the legislature convened in January and appointed a joint committee from the General Assembly and the Senate to report out a bill that would implement the provisions of the Morrill Act. From the outset, it appeared that the state normal school had the inside track. There we go. A course of instruction in agriculture had already started there in 1860. The principal, William F. Phillips, had the support and approval of the State Agricultural Society for the program. The main purpose of the school was to prepare teachers for the grammar schools of the state. The course in agriculture was therefore not for farmers or scientists, but for teachers who would later instruct the children of farmers. Any initial advantage that the normal school had was quickly nullified by such arguments as offered by an editorial published in the New Brunswick Fredonian, which applauded the recent fundraising campaign conducted by President Campbell that had given Rutgers a sizable endowment and compared it with the normal school, which was dependent upon a yearly legislative appropriation and thus might expire at any time. The Fredonian and New Brunswick's other newspaper, The Times, also stressed the location of New Brunswick in the center of the state. A pamphlet from an anonymous Princeton supporter listed several additional arguments against the normal school, including the fact that most of the teachers in the grammar school were female. The idea, quote, the idea that these ladies are to be successful teachers of scientific agriculture and the mechanic arts in the common schools, we think will hardly be entertained by any after serious reflection upon it. The unified attack of the two colleges effectively put the normal school out of the running. It was left to Rutgers and Princeton to battle it out. Rutgers launched the first offensive in the form of a pamphlet printed at the suggestion of Governor Vroom on behalf of the Trustees Committee. Written by David Murray, but based on notes provided by George Cook, and entitled, Considerations Regard to the Disposal to be Made by the Legislature of New Jersey of the Lands Granted by Congress for Encouraging Education in Agriculture and Mechanic Arts. The contents of the pamphlet was published in the Fredonian. In this circular, Murray drew attention to the library, the botanical and geological collections obtained by Cook and his predecessor, Professor Beck, the laboratories, and the existence of a scientific course which could be readily adapted to give instruction in mechanical arts and agriculture. However, the real substance of the pamphlet rested on the arguments provided by the special knowledge of George Cook. Because of his position with the State Geological Survey and his intimate acquaintance with farming, Cook was able to cite the advantages of having an experimental farm located near New Brunswick, where the greatest variety of soils could be found within a few miles. Here were soils of red shale, red sandstone, day, sand, salt marshes, peat, muck. Even the tidal meadows and the marl pits were nearby. Cook's private activities as consulting engineer and chemist with mining and industrial companies gave him a special awareness of the accessibility of iron, copper, lead, and zinc mines, which would make worthwhile field trips for students in engineering courses. For students interested in industrial careers, there were factories making India rubber, machinery, woolen, and cotton products in and nearby New Brunswick. Future military engineers would profit by trips to canals, railroads, bridges, and military installations of New York Harbor. Finally, the considerations drew attention to the presence of the headquarters of the New Jersey Geological Survey in New Brunswick and the advantage that the proposed future emphasis upon economic aspects would give the students at the college. From Princeton came two pamphlets, only one of which has been found. The unidentified writer stressed the age and reputation of the college, as well as the existing buildings, specimen collections, and laboratory equipment. But the most persuasive argument was that the Friends of the College would guarantee to construct a building, quote, equal to that of the Sheffield Scientific School at Yale, including lecture rooms, cabinets, apparatus, libraries, and fixtures and equipment for such purpose unsurpassed in the land. It was a fortunate coincidence for Rutgers' interest that at the very time its friends were supporting its candidacy for the land grant, George Cook, as state geologist, under the sponsorship and backing of the New Jersey Agricultural Society, was trying to get legislation again to finance the State Geological Survey. In connection with this effort, Cook read a lengthy report to the Society on the work that he had been doing on the survey, a report which he later read before the State Senate. Since this account was chiefly concerned with the conditions of agriculture in New Jersey and emphasized the means by which land under cultivation in the state could be increased by the judicious use of fertilizer, it could hardly have failed to impress the legislators with the genuine concern for agriculture and the real understanding of it at Rutgers College. Behind the scenes, forces were working in Rutgers' behalf. Cook was intricately engaged in writing, persuading, pressuring, and maneuvering during the first 3 months of 1864. Alumni and friends from all over the state rallied around and kept Cook informed of their activities. Cook himself became deeply involved in trying to influence votes. In a letter to Governor Vroom, he had suggested that the Rutgers College circular, prepared by he and Murray, be sent to Governor Joel Parker for transmission to the legislature. Cook also solicited the support of Joseph P. Bradley, Rutgers alumnus and later U.S. Supreme Court Justice, urging him to use his influence in gathering support for Rutgers College. and quote extensively from this letter, "The principal of the normal school and his Trenton friends are moving rapidly, every influence they can bring to bear to have the school located there, to have an experimental farm, et cetera, et cetera. Princeton is said to want it. I have no doubt Rutgers College would be benefited by an extension of its course of scientific instruction. Now you could do much by a letter to General Cook, who was the chief engineer of the Camden and Amboy Railroad, asking his influence actively in our favor, or in a more moderate way by pointing out the policy of centering everything in Trenton, or by letters to other members who would be glad to carry out your wishes. What is especially needed is votes." Toward the end of January and throughout the month of February, the pace of lobbying quickened. Jacob Wartendijk, an alumnus and member of the Trustees Committee advocating for the land grant, notified Cook that the Joint Committee of the Legislature would be deliberating the first week of February. He continued, quote, "I'm pretty confident now that the contest will be between us and Princeton, and we will have to exert ourselves next week and show as much interest as we can in the matter." Wartenberg followed up the following day with another letter. "After I left you last evening, I had the opportunity to sound Randolph and Chandler, who were two Senate members of the Legislative Committee, upon the college question. I think Randolph will, under any circumstances, favor the normal school, and I am almost sure that Chandler will not." Wartendijk urged Cook to talk with Chandler and, quote, "make sure of his countenance to our wishes." He also suggested that Cook make a personal call upon Dr. Thomas Dunn English, assemblyman from Bergen. A note sent by Charles Deschler, an editor of the Newark Daily Advertiser, to David Bishop offered some advice. To make sure of the agricultural project, don't let our folks think that talking and writing will accomplish much. Of course they are necessary, but not primarily so. The main thing is to secure the votes of the members of the legislature. The committee finally held its hearing on February 23rd, and representatives from the three institutions presented their claims. Speaking on behalf of the normal school were two prominent individuals, Judge David Nair and Joseph Potts. President John McLean and Professors Lyman Atwater and Dr. John Schenck represented Princeton. The Rutgers delegation included Professor Cook, Governor Vroom, and President Campbell. The arguments, according to the newspaper The Fredonian, were very elaborate and able. When the bill emerged from the committee, the name of the institution proposed for the land grant designation was Rutgers College. Opposition to the selection of Rutgers surfaced early in March, before the bill was even voted on with the full legislature, when the Methodist Conference protested the granting of an award to a denominational institution. But Assemblyman English from Bergen replied that the denominational character of the college had nothing to do with the scientific department, and that Rutgers was a more suitable college, quote, to develop those sciences which shall elevate agriculture. On March 24th, the bill passed the Senate by a vote of 12-6, and on March 30th, sailed through the Assembly 50-1. The bill was signed by Governor Joel Parker on April 4th, 1864. Advocates for Rutgers were amazed and overjoyed. Garrett Vroom, the son of Peter Vroom, expressed his excitement to Cook. "It certainly was a great triumph for our college." He expressed surprise that Rutgers received 7 or 8 votes more than expected. As jubilant as the Rutgers folks were, friends of Princeton reacted to the selection with surprise and disappointment. Writing in the Newark Daily Advertiser, a Princeton supporter offered these thoughts, quote, "Nassau Hall could not condescend from her high moral position to the questionable practices by which it seemed necessary to engineer even meritorious applications through the legislature. She made her proposal and trusted in her superior merits. It is left for that college, unaided by the state, which thus ignores her firstborn and most illustrious child, to go on in her work. This, with no unkind wishes for her younger and more favored sister, she will do." The Morrill Act had allowed the states considerable latitude in determining how land-grant colleges should be, and a variety of plans were offered. Planning for this Rutgers Scientific School began shortly after the governor signed the bill, and the trustees immediately appointed George Cook as vice president of the college. One of the first concerns confronting Cook and his colleagues was money. If anyone expected the land grant would bring great amounts of money into the college coffers, they were soon to be greatly disappointed. The Morrill Act provided for a donation of land or land scrip to each state in the amount of 30,000 acres for each senator and representative in Congress. Only states which still had areas of public land within their borders were able to receive the land. The others had to sell scrip. Because few eastern states contained any public land, the market was soon flooded with scrip, and the price dropped from the expected $1.25 per acre to 50 cents or below. The total amount received in New Jersey was $116,000. Rutgers was to get only the interest on this sum, which early on amounted to about $6,900 a year, but which subsequently dwindled to $5,800. The terms of the Morrill Act dictated that only 10% could be used for acquiring land. The remainder had to be used for faculty salaries. The terms of the Morrill Act and those set by the state legislature imposed a number of requirements on Rutgers that necessitated changes in faculty and curriculum and increases in investment and expenditures. Although the scrip sold slowly, only $1,200 had been received by the end of 1865, the college had to set up an experimental farm and provide for instruction in agriculture, military practices, and engineering. In addition, the professor of agriculture was required to present a lecture in every county each year. Scholarships for students from each county, the exact number to be determined by the population of that county, were also required. Thus, a considerable financial burden was placed upon Rutgers. The greatest expenditure was for the farm, but Rutgers immediately set forth to purchase one. The trustees formed a committee with George Cook as secretary and met to devise a plan to raise necessary funds. Such was their confidence that even before the money was raised, a 100-acre farm on the outskirts of New Brunswick was purchased for $15,000. The farm was in deplorable shape, most of it covered with scrub trees and bushes. But it was ideal as an experimental farm because of the large number of conditions which could show improvement. But this also added a drain on the college's resources. President Campbell reported to the trustees that in addition to the initial investment, the farm cost $3,000. The primary focus of the land grant was to provide for agriculture and mechanical education and military training. The last two proved to be popular with students, but were easy to administer and flourished almost from the beginning. Agricultural education was more difficult. Despite the emphasis placed on agriculture, few students wished to study it. Prosperity after graduation necessitated a large investment to purchase a farm. Engineering often the easier road to success. Furthermore, precedents in the curriculum at the college level were few and not notably successful. Even before the legislation passed in New Jersey, Cook had written to Luther Tucker, editor of the popular periodical Country Gentleman, asking his views on agricultural education. With his assistance as well as David Murray's help, Cook devised a curriculum that incorporated his philosophy. In his view, the scientific school should stress rigorous intellectual activity in the basic scientific disciplines rather than vocationally oriented courses combined with on-the-job training, an approach that was adopted by many Midwestern land-grant colleges at the time. The plan developed into two courses of study, one in civil engineering and mechanics, and the other in chemistry and agriculture. All scientific students would take the same course during the first year, but in the second and third years of this three-year program, they would follow different patterns according to their chosen track. Given the fact that of scholarships were available for students in each county, enrollment was anticipated for the first entering class to be about 30 students. Additions to the faculty and facilities were now required before venturing on to this new journey. With the removal of the theological professors to Herzog Hall, the two wings of Old Queens that previously served as faculty residences became available for laboratories and classrooms. This complemented the classrooms, armory, and museum that were part of Van Ness Hall. That's another. In 1866, a well-equipped observatory appeared on the east side of the college grounds, the gift of New York City businessman Daniel Schenck. This is Schenck Observatory. To bolster the faculty for instruction in this school, Rutgers appointed Luther Tucker as professor of agriculture and John Smock, a recent alumnus, as tutor in chemistry and agriculture. To fulfill requirements in engineering, Captain Joshua Kellogg, a West Point graduate, was named professor of engineering and superintendent of military instruction. In addition, David Murray provided instruction in astronomy. Unfortunately, when the fall term arrived in 1865, only 7 students appeared. Scholarship recipients were to be determined by each county board of chosen freeholders, but they proved to be negligent. Only 2 students had been appointed. And those who did arrive were more interested in engineering than agriculture. In addition, after delivering a few lectures, Luther Tucker resigned in 1866. With his resignation, the duty of delivering the agricultural lectures in the counties fell upon George Cook. But those lectures received a welcome response from members of the farming communities around the state and were incorporated into the yearly reports of the Board of Visitors, the state governing body that oversaw the school's development. Cook now claimed the title of vice president and professor of chemistry, natural history, and agriculture. He also served as state geologist, director of the college farm, and an instructor in chemistry, geology, and physiology for students enrolled in the classical program. Imagine today having those responsibilities. It's amazing. Changes were soon to come, and by 1871, the scientific course was extended from 3 years to 4 years. New, energetic, and productive faculty members were added, and partial students were admitted and received certificates for completing the courses they had pursued. And responsibility for the scholarships were given to the county school superintendents. And during the same time, a new building appeared between Oak Queens and Van Ness. Designed by architect Henry Janeway Hardenberg, Geological Hall as it was known initially, became one of the first structures on land-grant college campuses that was devoted to scientific instruction. For the first 15 years, 159 students attended the Rutgers Scientific School, of whom 99 graduated. Among the students pursuing the scientific program were the majority of Japanese students who studied at Rutgers during the 1860s and 1870s. Of the graduates, 41 pursued careers in engineering, 24 entered business or manufacturing, 25 entered the traditional professions of law, medicine, or teaching, 3 became architects. However, only 6 followed the occupation of farming. But the program slowly grew and was placed on secure footing with the help of the federal government. In 1887, Congress passed the Hatch Act, which provided funds for the establishment of the agricultural experiment stations at land-grant institutions. And the second Morrill Act of 1890 provided each land-grant college appropriations in the amount of $15,000, and that rose by additional $1,000 each year to reach $25,000. However, unlike many other land-grant institutions which received additional funding from their state legislatures, New Jersey was not forthcoming. How unusual. However, they did finance the construction of New Jersey Hall to accommodate the work of the New Jersey Agricultural Experiment Station, which had been under the direction of George Cook since its inception. George Hammell Cook's life suddenly came to an end on September 22nd, 1889. He had devoted 25 years of his life to promoting scientific instruction at Rutgers and contributing his knowledge in agriculture and geology to the citizens of New Jersey. Everyone at Rutgers should be proud that the campus where we are gathering this evening, on the site of the original college farm that he helped develop, where he made his home, is named in his honor. Including her wonderful and insightful biography of George Cook, Jean Wilson Sidar offered a quote from George Merrill's First 100 Years of American Geology that captures the essence of this man. I'd like to quote from that. A devotee of science, free from the narrowness of the specialists, of the personal idiosyncrasies that so frequently mar the character of men of this class. He loved science for science's sake, yet did not close his eyes to its economic bearing, nor call upon an overtaxed public to support him in the work he loved, regardless of its outcomes. Never had anyone the interests of the public more at heart than this man. For himself, he asked simply the privilege of doing the work and doing it to the best of his abilities. Thank you very much.